Hey, I'm John. In this video, I'm going to continue building this Destroid Tomahawk from Macross. Now in part one of this series, I got everything painted up, put a gloss coat on it, and gave it the decals. There's still a little bit of detail painting to do, but of course the bulk of what's going to be in store for you is the weathering, and I'm really excited about weathering this guy. All right, I'm going to start things off by just doing some dry brushing along these joints here, just to give them a little bit of a definition, some edge highlighting, help the shapes stand out just a little bit. I'm using Vallejo Sky Gray to do the dry brushing. I get these vents on the waist, the gray area on the feet. Definitely can't forget the guns. I'm going to get these a little heavier to prepare them for some later weathering steps. Using some Vallejo Cold White, I'm going to do a heavy dry brush, almost a wet brush, over these pale gray, sky gray rocket launchers. I'm just going to focus on the ends of them so that they appear a little brighter and the rest will appear kind of shadowed. I've got some Vallejo Model Color Beige, and I'm just going to use this makeup brush to go around, and I'm just going to dry brush all of the edges. It's not going to make a huge change in the color, but it's just going to brighten up those edges. Like you can see there, it's just going to brighten them up just a little bit to help bring out the shape of the model. It's going to take a little while. In addition to getting the edges, I'm also going to hit some of these raised panels like this with the dry brush color, just to give a slight modulated effect. Just help them stand out a little bit. When I put a wash around them, it's going to really help them pop. All right, next I want to start doing some panel line detailing and helping bring out some of these raised details. For this, I'm going to be using this AK enamel wash. It's for DAC vehicles. And I guess that means German Africa Corps. Or I might be wrong about that. Anyway, I've got this enamel wash. It's supposed to go over desert colored vehicles, so I figured this would be a good choice. Now, I've got some in my palette that is thinned down and some that is not, so that as I want different intensities of it, I can switch to it. Now, because this thing is glossy, the surface is glossy, this stuff should flow really well, and it does. Now, I'm not being particularly neat about it, because since this is going to be a weathered, grimy model, then I'm okay if it spreads around and makes some stains. I'll go back in and clean it up later. But I figure any additional staining it brings on from the get-go is just fine. You could use acrylic washes here. I like acrylic washes. To be honest, I prefer them because of the drying time. But this model has some very fine detail, and acrylic washes would leave tide marks. And the techniques that I normally use, dry brushing and some other things, to cover up those tide marks, they work well on a Warhammer vehicle and can work well on Gundam and stuff like that. But on this one, which I'm wanting to keep more of a, I'm wanting to have more of a realistic military look to it. You know, yeah, it's a sci-fi vehicle, but at the same time, I want it to look like, okay, this could be a real thing. So I'm going to be doing weathering techniques that are more like you would apply to a tank model rather than a sci-fi model. Although a lot of times the lines between the two are admittedly blurred. So I'm using this enamel wash because it allows me cleanup time, or allows me some easy cleanup. And I could use oils, but they take a lot longer to dry. And while I'm in no particular rush right now, I'm thankfully actually quite ahead on my video schedule. The day that I'm filming this, I won't actually release this for another 4 or 5 weeks. So I'm quite ahead on my schedule, which is a good thing. But I don't want to fall behind. I'm trying to get ahead so that during the Christmas holidays I can take some time off, hopefully, and not have to worry about keeping up with getting videos done. Anyway, boy, I can ramble. Anyway, enamels dry in about 24 hours. So while they take a while to dry, acrylics you can put stuff over acrylics in 10-15 minutes. These take a little longer to dry, but it's going to work out for me. So I'm just spreading these around, and as I've rambled, you've seen I'm not doing anything special. It doesn't have to be a gloss surface. You can do this over a satin surface. You can do it over a matte surface. I've done that because I wanted it to. I was going for the finish that it gives you. Over a matte surface, the enamels tend to bleed, and by that I mean when you touch a drop of it, say to this bolt here, it's going to spread all around in little patterns, and you'll suddenly see why it's a matte surface, because there's all this texture on it, very fine micro texture, and that can take a little while to clean up. Now, it gives a very cool appearance that you can take advantage of. So if that's what you're going for, certainly do that. But generally, I like doing this over a gloss or a satin finish at the very least, so that I can clean it up and make it, it gives you some flexibility on how grimy or how clean you want it to be. Certainly if you're planning on doing a clean model, but you're wanting panel lining, then you're going to want to keep it very glossy while you're doing the wash, and you'll be able to clean it up and keep really sharp, nice looking lines without staining everything around it. That will happen. Even in a satin coat, you'll get some staining. But for a clean one, definitely go for a gloss finish. I'm just taking advantage of the gloss finish right now. I'm later going to go back and put a satin finish on for next weathering steps. And I think at the end, if it's not matted down enough, I'll hit it with a matte coat. We'll see. I'm giving this about half an hour to dry, and I'm just going to take a dry cotton bud and go in and begin brushing this away. Now, when I'm doing this, especially if it's going to be a weathered model, I do the streaking in the direction, or the cleaning it in the direction I'm going to eventually want streaks to be, so that if anything does streak, I can just pretty much leave it in place. Now there are a few areas like right here that can't quite do that, but for the most part, I just go in the direction that I'm going to later add streaks, and I just go through and I do this cleanup completely like this. And it's easier to get off on a gloss surface. If you're doing this on a satin or a matte surface, maybe a little more difficult. But what I'll do is do this basic cleanup with the dry cotton bud, and then I'll go back later and I'll dip it in. I'll get a clean one and I'll dip it in the odorless thinner, and then damp off pretty much 99% of it on a paper towel or something like that. And then I'll just go back in and look for areas that didn't get quite as clean as I wanted, and I'll just clean those up a little bit. I may use a paintbrush if it's a little harder to get to or something like that, or if I want to do a little more blending to get the weathering started, I guess you'd say. It all depends on what your final goal for the finish is. That's the key thing, I think, to keep in mind when you're building any model, is start with kind of an idea of where you want to get. I mean, it sounds simple, but if you know, okay, I want to have it being a very dirty model, representing a lot of wear and tear, then as you're going through a lot of these steps, it will inform, I guess you'd say, how you need to proceed doing various things. So I'm not being too concerned here with the cleanup, that if it leaves stains, because I know that when I get to the final weathering, that'll just all get incorporated in. If I were doing this as wanting this to be an absolutely clean one, I would have approached it a little different to make sure that there weren't any stains, weren't any streaks, anything left afterwards that could mar the finish. So always keep that in mind. It's one of the reasons I like doing weathered models. It's just a lot easier in my mind. Keeping something clean is so hard. But I'm going to continue doing this. I've got all the other parts scattered around here off camera. And I'm just going to continue doing this cleanup and see where that leaves us. I'm going to give a coat of Known Oil to the guns to darken them down a little bit and make them look a little more gunnish. But what it'll do is that dry brushing effect that I put on earlier, it'll still allow that to show through, but it's just going to darken everything down a bit and shade in those recesses. I'm not worried if it pools up too much around here. I don't want huge pools happening, but I'm okay if it gets a little lumpy looking, because these are going to be big giant guns and they're going to have to be cleaned and oiled and all sorts of things like that. So that'll help them look a little more realistic. Putting on the Known Oil is also going to matte it down. I'm not using Known Oil gloss. I'm just using the regular Known Oil, and that'll go ahead and matte that down. All right, this eyepiece in here was originally painted basalt gray, but as I got to thinking about it, I realized that it's not going to be real visible in terms of contrast. It's going to be behind a clear part that's going to be tinted green. So I realized I would need some contrast in there just to kind of make a little bit of that detail have even a chance of being seen. So what I'm doing is I'm going to give it an overcoat of Vallejo Sky Gray, which will almost appear white. I'm going to make use of one of Citadel's contrast paints, Black Templar, and I'm going to paint that in there. And it's going to act kind of like a wash, but the contrast paints are designed to settle into the recesses and then kind of pull away from but tint any of the raised surfaces. So I'll go in and paint it in like that, and then just use my brush to just kind of wick away any excess, because I don't want it too saturated with it. But I think once it's done, that'll provide enough contrast that it'll show up behind the green clear part. All right, it's time to start the chipping. Now, the first layer I want to do is going to be fairly heavy in its application, but it's going to be really super low contrast. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of this Ushabti bone, which is almost the same color. Now, I want to do that to simulate the very shallowest surface scratches, abrasions, fading from the sun, just to break up the monotone look a little bit. And I want to pretty much put it over all the model. I'm not going to concentrate just on edges or areas that would be chipped, but just pretty much on everything, because I think it'll just give some nice tonal variation, even though it's going to be, like I said, it's going to be super low contrast. Then I'm going to go in and do more traditional chipping with this screaming skull. That's going to represent a deeper layer of chips, and it's going to be in the areas you would expect it to be, along the edges of panels here, along here, just anywhere that there's going to be scratches. And then I'm going to make a mix of Mechanica Standard Gray and Lead Belcher. I want just a bit of a metallic sheen to it, but I want it to be more of a grayish composite look. And then that's going to represent the very deepest layer of chips that actually go down through the paint to whatever the underlying material is. I don't know in lore if it's some kind of composite, some kind of steel, something that rusts, something that doesn't. For my purposes, I feel like it doesn't really matter. So I'm just simply going to try and make it look cool. We'll see, but I'm going to get started with this Ushabti bone. Now to apply this, I'm going to use this makeup brush. It's kind of like my new favorite thing to apply paint with is this makeup brush. And I just like the way it looks. And so all I want to do is just go in here and start stippling it on like that. And you can see I'm not trying to be light or petite about it. I want it to give a varied look to the surface. Let me focus on that so maybe you can see it. I don't know if this will show up on camera. I can see it with my eyes here. I don't know if it'll show up on camera. It's very, very low contrast. And that's exactly what I want. Because this is going to be something that somebody else is going to own. This is, I know people hate when I mention stuff like this, but I apologize. It's a commission build. No, I'm not back into the business of commission builds, but when somebody brings along the kits you've always wanted to build and they say, hey, will you do this? Yeah, I'm going to jump on it. But anyway, the person who's buying this, I want to make sure that when they get it, that if they do a real close-up examination of the detail, they're going to go, yeah, that was worth, paying some money for that. So, I mean, not that I normally don't try to do a good job, but I really want this one to look special. So I'm putting in this light color of chip here, this surface distressing, and I'm just going to go over everything. I'm not going to try and hide anything or, not hit an edge or go light or anything like that. Everything is getting covered with it in some way, shape, or form. On areas like this, I'll use it to kind of go a little heavier and just reinforce that modulation that I introduced earlier, maybe along surfaces like that. But I'll just continue doing this, and once it dries, I'll move on to the lighter color. All right, I've got the Ushabti bone put on there, and it's just the barest of contrast going on there. But that's what I want, because I can see it. That's the main thing I'm looking for. Now I'm going to go with another fairly low contrast but more visible color, Screaming Skull. Now the application method will be the same. I'm just getting off most of the paint here on my paper towel. And here I'm going to be a little more focused. I'm going to go in where you would expect the scratches to be, along edges, where it's going to catch things, where it's going to have impacts, things like that. Much more visible. Still very low contrast, but you see how that's looking. Now, by going in with this very low contrast chipping, it allows me to actually go fairly heavy on the chipping and get away with it. If I were using a much lighter color on this, it would look, in my opinion, it would look way overdone for what I'm trying to achieve. Because remember here, I'm not trying to achieve an anime look. I'm trying to achieve a look as if this were a real fighting vehicle. So, and it's in 72nd scale, so I have to keep things in scale. This brush and this method gives me the ability to do things very, very small, very petite, very low contrast, and yet it's going to sell the notion of chipping happening here. When you're doing your chipping, be sure and go over your decals. Decals get chipped too, so that's something to keep in mind. But I'll just continue doing this along the areas that I think would receive wear and tear from operational use, whether it be battle damage or parts rubbing together, or, you know, I mean, this is a big tall thing. It's going to, if it goes through a city, it's going to be stomping down buildings and, you know, all of that stuff. So I'll just keep doing this, and you can see how that's looking. I'm liking that. And that'll prepare the base for the darker chips, which are really going to show up. And I think then that low contrast stuff will really help. Sometimes I've done it where I use a drastically lighter chip to do two-color chipping, but sometimes I think that doesn't turn out as well as this. You may think different, of course. Do as you feel is best. But I'm becoming more and more of a fan of low contrast for the two-color chips, at least for the first color, and then going very high contrast for the last one. All right, now I'm going to start doing some darker chips now that I've got the others in place. Now to start with, I'm going to use a sponge. The pattern it's going to give me is better for what I'm going to be shooting for than the makeup brush will. Now what I've got is a mix of 1 part lead belcher, 1 part Mechanicus standard gray. It's just making, really, if I would have used Mechanicus standard gray, probably would have looked about the same. This has just a slight steely look to it. But here I'm going to go in and I'm going to start developing chipping just along the main edges where it's, where it's going to get chipped. Like down here, it's a little light. Sometimes when you're doing this sponge chipping, it's better to start off a little light and see the pattern it gives you rather than going in with it too wet. But that's what I'm going to be looking for. Even though I'm going to be doing a lot of chips in terms of the surface area, that right there is about the size that I'm going to be looking for. I don't want for there to be a lot of areas that are really big chips. I want more to be smaller chips, and I'm okay if there's a heavy volume of them, but I want the size to be a little smaller. I'm just going to continue doing this, working around the lower legs. And I think I mentioned this before in other videos. I don't know if I have in this one. I tend to use the feet and lower legs as my point of reference for the heaviest weathering. And then on a mecha like this, everything above it gets less weathering progressively as it goes up, less chipping, unless it needs it on, say, the arms or something like that. But for the most part, it's going to be the legs that get the heaviest level of chipping, and then everything else is relative to that. It's just another visual reference that helps me figure out what I need to be doing as I'm, besides staying on camera, with the weathering and the chipping and so forth. Okay, here you can see the results of the chipping, and I'm very happy with that. That's it's always nice when you kind of end up with what you were shooting for. So that's the chipping level I want. Now I may go back in, and it's getting towards the end of the day, so I'm going to have to cut my filming here. You won't notice it. It'll just be jump cuts. I may go in and do a little bit of brush chips just to make a few of them a little larger and maybe refine them just a little bit. But as I'm looking at this and the other parts, I'm pretty happy with it. So I'll probably just let it stand as it is. Okay, I need to explain the next segment you're going to see. The next segment that we're going to go into is adding some streaks and stains with enamels. Now, when I first got up this morning at 04:30 to start filming this, my plan was to do the chipping, which I've done, and then do the streaks and the stains, and that was my intent. I didn't have it written down, but I knew, okay, this is what I want to do. And so I went into the kitchen and made some coffee and checked the news and finally said, okay, let's get to work. And I sat down and I filmed the segment about streaking. So you're going to see that. There's not going to be any chips, but don't let that throw you. The chipping is supposed to come before the streaking. So see the streaking, but know the chips are supposed to be under that. And then after that segment, I'll get everything squared away. I want to start adding some streaks and stains and things like that to the surface of the model, just to get a little more involved beyond what I did with the panel lines. Now for this, I just grabbed another AK wash, this enamel wash, and it's just a slightly different color of brown essentially than the other one. The main reason I grabbed it is they were sitting side by side on my shelf, and this is the one I grabbed, and I said, it'll work. So no great thought into choosing the color, but that's what I'm using. Now what I want to do is I want to just start by getting some oil in, or some enamel in place, just to form the basis for what I want to do in terms of streaking. Now you see I just went right into the pot, and I'm just going to paint some on just like that. Nothing neat about it. It doesn't look particularly good. But it's just the places that I want to have the streaks and the stains. Now you can build it up underneath something like that. You can streak it down. I'm going to do it from the bolt details like that. You're essentially putting some color on the surface of the model that we can later go back and manipulate. I'm going to put quite a bit under here because I want to imagine those as some kind of vents where something is happening, and so there's a likelihood of fluid stains. But it can be anywhere. It can represent leaks. It can represent where water runs down the mecha and collects dirt, grime, and it collects underneath those places, and then as more rain comes, it'll streak out from under them. It can represent a lot of different things, and you can use multiple colors, of course. That will help give a more interesting look to the finish. But I've got that on there, and I'm going to give it just a couple of minutes to dry and then move on to blending those. One of the keys to working with enamels and oils is the concept that they're essentially color sitting on the surface waiting to be manipulated. Don't let, terms like streaking and blending and all of that, don't let those intimidate you. Every now and then I'll get a question and somebody will say, I really don't understand this blending thing. What does that mean? Essentially, you're just pushing color around. It's not cured, it's not dry, it's only been on here for 10 minutes, and while it looks dry, I can still manipulate it around. And what I do is I get some thinner on my brush, same brush that I use to apply it, and I wipe off most of it, so there's just a very little bit of thinner. And then I can begin doing quite a few things. Like if I want to try and extend this streak, I can start bringing my brush in towards the edge of it, and you see how it just starts pulling that down like that, and it starts refining that. I can pull that excess all the way down and wipe it away like that. I can come in from the other side, and I'm just starting away from the enamel and then working my way into it very carefully. Just little strokes like that. And you see how it just pulls some of that down? And what I'm left with is a fairly convincing looking streak. Now I can go into other areas and I can push it back into the color like that. And again, all I'm doing is just sliding this stuff around on the surface. Now, right now the surface is gloss. I didn't do any kind of coating over it after I did the decals. You have to be a little more careful on gloss because it'll slide around a lot more on you. A satin surface, if you've not done this before, I recommend doing it on a satin surface. But I can pull the oils, I can push them back up towards the source like that. I said oils, I meant enamels because that's what I'm using here, but oils work the same way. I can push it back up like that, then I can start streaking it down like that. So the use of enamels in oils, the reason they're so flexible is because you can move them around. Until this stuff fully dries and is cured, you can do whatever you want with it. If I decide I don't like the way it looks at all, I can just blend it completely away. I can wipe it completely off, you know, like that. Now, I want to leave some on there because I do want a streak there, but it makes the point. I can just wipe it away. I can clean it up. If I don't like it, I can go in and push that back over towards there. So don't be intimidated by the use of enamels and oils for weathering your models. It's just color sitting on the surface waiting for you to do something with it. Now, it takes a little time, as you're seeing. I'm talking and I've only done a very little bit, but it gives a very, very nice look that you just can't get with other products. Every now and then I'll go back over into my palette and get some more of the odorless thinner on it, and I'm just damping it off. I'm actually damping it off on my t-shirt. But you just keep working with it. You'll know you need to get some more thinner on there when it basically is not working for you, when it's not moving anything around. But I can just keep streaking that down. If I want to, I can push it back up. I can pull it off to the side. So the very flexibility of these products is what makes them so beneficial. Now, I'll need to give this 24 hours to dry to make sure that it's fully set. But you see the process I'm using. I'm just going to go around the rest of the model and add these streaks and stains in and just kind of get it looking like I want it to. Okay, I've finished these sections, and you can see that it's just giving it a streaky, kind of grimy look on some of these features. I'm still going to go in and add some more down here. There's a lot that needs to be done, a lot of little greeblies and details that needs to be done. But I think it demonstrates that all you're really doing is just using a thinner moistened brush to push color around. It's not hard. It's once you start doing it, I think the biggest mistake that I see people make when they're doing this, or that they tell me about, is that they have too much thinner on their brush. If you're touching your brush to it and you're seeing thinner running down, or it's just immediately wiping everything off, you've either got too little enamel or oil, or most likely too much thinner. Really wipe the thinner off. It's better to have too little thinner and see, the effect that it has than to have too much. So get it damped off and simply just push and pull and move the color around until you like it. And if you don't like it, you really can just take your thinners, take a cotton bud, and just wipe it away, and it'll get rid of that. Now, one note, if you've painted your model with enamel paints, you will need to put some kind of acrylic clear coat over your enamel paints to do this kind of stuff, because if you don't, as soon as you start blending and streaking and adding thinner, it's not only going to streak the stuff you want to streak, it's going to streak the stuff you don't want to streak. It's one of the principal reasons that I use only lacquers or acrylics for my base paint, is so when I go over them with oils and enamels, there's no chance of interaction. It just makes things easier on me. But just something to keep in mind if you do use enamel paints. So now I've got to go and get this done on this surface, and this surface, and this surface, and then this other leg, and then the torso, and you kind of get the picture. It's going to take me a little while, but in the end, and you can see I've already been doing some of this, in the end, I think it's worth it because it really sells the notion of a streaky, dirty, grimy military vehicle. All right, well, I apologize for that mix-up in the order of things. I actually thought of refilming the whole streaking segment to do it after I did the chips, but I thought, no, the footage is good, the demonstration is good, just the idiot behind the camera doesn't quite know what he's doing. So again, I apologize for that. Just to give you a little insight into the way I do things, when I'm filming a video, I may have, you know, one leg in one state and the other leg in another state, not U.S. states, but condition, and another part in another condition, so that I can film kind of the model in a rolling way. So, you know, I can do the work the night before and do one segment with one part and another segment with another part, another segment with another part, and then finish the video and then actually have to finish the model. So that's the way I work, and sometimes I get a little confused about what I'm supposed to be doing. So I think I'm going to call this a video, though. I've spent time looking at chipping and streaking, and there's still the next video, which is going to finish up this series, is going to cover you know, more streaks and stains and environmental effects and rust. So there's still plenty to go to get it finished up. But I thought I'd show just what I've gotten it up to at this point, and I've still got work to do to get all of the model up to this point. But you can see the stains and the streaks that I've put in here with the chips, and how those are looking. I don't want it to be too heavy, but I do want it to look used and things like that. And I like the way the chipping is turning out. I haven't done any streaking on the feet yet, but I wanted those to be a little more chipped up, and I'm really digging those chips there. I like that. That combination of the gray and the lead belcher, it's just got just a little bit of a sheen to it, and I really like that. So here, I'll get that a little closer. So I'm real happy with how that turned out. And that's just right there, that's just sponge chipping right there. Good stuff. I'm liking this. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this video. And if you're still watching at this point, I especially thank you for that. I like to sometimes, for the people that watch all the way to the end, I like to kind of leave a little Easter egg. So if you're still watching at this point, I would love it if you would drop a comment down below that just says, "Get the order right." And you and I will know what it's talking about, the folks who hang around to the end. So just say, "Get the order right." And we can all have a laugh about that. But again, thank you for joining me, for being patient with my gaffes. I do appreciate that. I do hope you learned something from the video. I hope you found it helpful or useful or informative or at least entertaining as I've gone through this, and I just found it beneficial to watch. If you've not already done so, I would be grateful if you'd click the subscribe button down somewhere over there and hit the little bell icon to be reminded when I have new videos out. And there are links down below to the various social medias and to my website. I'd be grateful if you'd check those out. If you are a Patreon supporter, thank you so much for your support, for coming alongside and helping me with this. I really couldn't do it without you. We just wouldn't have the budget to do the kits that I do at the pace, and you hear it if you hang around the videos. You know, I just wouldn't be able to do it without you. So I'm truly grateful for your support. And if you're interested in supporting me and this channel and the work that goes on, there is a link to Patreon below, and please click that and check out the offerings that are available. And finally, as I always like to do, I'll leave you with one final closing thought. In this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.